Hello babes in bookland. This is my January wrap-up video. So let's just talk about some books. January was a pretty decent reading month. I read 5 novels/novellas and 2 graphic novels. First off, I read The Stone Gods by Janette Winterson. So it's a post-apocalyptic love story, and our main characters are Billy and a robot sapiens named Spike. The planet that humans currently inhabit is destructing and it's crumbling. So there's an active search for a new planet to inhabit to continue life as they know it. The thing about life as they know it is that it's kind of fucked up. So like any good post-apocalyptic story, the government has been corrupted and replaced by corporations. Physical and genetic modification has become so ubiquitous that men and women, but mostly women, have been able to genetically fix themselves at a younger and younger age, which is becoming more and more desirable. And it's creating an environment where pedophilia is less taboo and less frowned upon. In addition to genetically fixing at a younger age, there are also men and women who are getting modifications to add body parts or to place body parts where they wouldn't normally belong to facilitate fetish sex. There are members of the population who have chosen to abstain from genetic modifications, genetic and physical modifications, and have not embraced the new technologies as wholly as much of the other sectors of the population have. And so these folks have sort of been pushed to the outskirts and live as outcasts in this society, where because they're not participating necessarily in the consumption and use of this technology, but they do end up kind of suffering the consequences of the technology of the day. One of the main things that I took away from this book were that with human relationship to technology and how much it progresses our society, humans don't necessarily progress as rapidly as the technology does. And thus we have a lot of wars of ideology. We have a war of technology and we have war of ethics. And in some way we're still fighting wars about who and how we can love. There were so many strengths in this book. I mean, of course, her language and her writing is just so fantastic. But I think what was particularly special about this, and the section I really enjoyed, was the description of the planets when they are out searching for a habitable planet. It was very mythical, but also familiar and tangible. And it was one of those things that the descriptions of this environment in space was just so haunting and so nerve-wracking, but also kind of beautiful to see. There were a couple of sections within the book that I thought were a little bit weak, and particularly a section that explained the stone gods. And I understand what she was doing there, but I do think that it fell a little flat in contrast to the other sections that she was writing. Overall, I really did enjoy this book. I would reread it. I would recommend it to anybody. So another book I read this month was for my real life book club, and it's We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. This book did win a PEN Faulkner Award and was shortlisted for the 2014 Man Booker Award. This story follows Rosemary, who is, when we meet her, is going through a bit of a tough time. She's acting out, she's getting arrested, and she seeks fellowship in a character called Marlowe, who is very sultry and is very physically and energetically attractive. Marlowe, welcomed or not, convinces Rosemary to confront her past. And within Rosemary's past is the disappearance of her sister Fern when she was around 5 years old. And after the disappearance of Fern, her family began to fall apart. Her brother was not coping well. Her mother and her father were not coping well. This kind of took a toll on Rosemary, as these were her formative years and her family was not the most cohesive unit. She'd been told a story by her parents about what happened to Fern, but she can't really rely on that memory, and she can't rely on her own memories. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she thinks that she did something to make Fern disappear, to make her go away. And to add to the complexity of these family dynamics, we find out that Fern was a chimpanzee. So what I liked about this book was that it was easy to read, the pacing was fair, There was a mix of likable and unlikable characters, and I appreciated the originality of the story. However, there was something that it really lacked that I couldn't put my finger on. There was just this kind of zhuzh missing from it that didn't really propel it for me in the direction of a book that I would recommend somebody or that I would reread. It was kind of akin to a dull knife for me, where if you put some effort into it, you could get the job done. But you know that there's something in that drawer that's sharper, that can get the job done better and faster. My sharp knives are yet to come. And God, these two books just blew me away. I'm in love. The next book that I read was The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. Very, very short book. It's just a little novella. It's 81 pages with the story and the afterword. It was translated from Portuguese into English by Benjamin Mosier, who also wrote a biography about Clarice Lispector called Why This World, which I'm very much looking forward to reading. I don't want to talk too much about this book because I do plan on doing an extended discussion when I read more of her work and her biography. Our protagonist in the story is a woman named Macabea, and she has had kind of an unfortunate existence. She lives in poverty. She's not very attractive. She's not very experienced when it comes to the world and how to behave in it. She's a country girl who's moved to Rio de Janeiro and just doesn't have a lot going for her. And she has this boyfriend who is just this very overinflated, phony person who doesn't seem to like her very much, but keeps her around, probably because it makes him feel better about himself. But with all of this going on, she has this lightness to her and this resilience where she allows these things, these sharp things that people say to her, to just kind of roll off her back. And there's a way that it's written that is just, it's indescribable. It's like, I almost thought of it when I was first reading it like Pippi Longstocking, you know, how when people say things about her, she always has this way of like spinning it into something positive. Like that's sort of how it is, but in a way that it's a little more mature and has a little bit more weight and gravity to it, but is somehow still very light. I don't know how she accomplishes this, but it's fascinating to read. And her story is all being told third person by an observer named Rodrigo, who is a city dweller in Rio de Janeiro and watches Macabea with a lot of interest and almost this very distant admiration of her. What I liked about this writing was that it was very strong and it was astute, and the language was very concise and it was careful and it was specific and it wasn't void of emotion. While there was a lot of feeling to it, it wasn't saccharine. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the best I can do right now. So yes, I will be consuming all of Clarice Lispector's work within the next few months, I hope. The next person I'm going to discuss is the indomitable Octavia E. Butler. I read Kindred for the first time. This was written in 1979, and this follows our protagonist Dana, who is a Black woman living in California in 1976, who is inexplicably and unexplainably transported to pre-Civil War Maryland, where she ends up saving the life of a white boy who is drowning in the river. And these transports between her time California and pre-Civil War Maryland continue to happen. And we find out that somehow, some way, Dana is responsible for keeping this child alive, and that his survival is inextricably linked to her survival. Now, this book, her writing is so powerful, and this novel was so accessible. I think for people who have not previously had very good experiences with science fiction, or maybe need kind of like a starter kit for science fiction, that this is really a phenomenal, phenomenal novel to start with. It's not overly scientific. The rules seem pretty simple and it's easy to follow. And it'll just kind of tug at some other things, these very difficult issues that she talks about and she describes so well. And I feel like these experiences are so lived in, and it's exactly the kind of stories I really do enjoy reading, where you kind of break yourself against these issues and you break yourself again and again and again. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I think this book does a really good job of just presenting and talking about sacrifice, and that sometimes compromises of your values and your character have to be done to protect yourself and the ones that you love. I could praise it up and down for just the deeply complex presentation of relationships and so much stuff, but again, I'll save it for the review. And then I also read 2 graphic novels. So I read the graphic novel version of Kindred by Damian Duffy and Jennings, which, if the book is not something that you're particularly interested in reading, I think that this graphic novel is an incredible companion. This book is very special, and I think that the 2 authors and illustrators did a phenomenal job at being very careful about how they presented this material, and did such an incredible job honoring this story in a graphic novel form. So hats off to Damian Duffy and Jennings. I also read Snowpiercer Volume 1 by Jean-Marc Rochette, Benjamin Legrande, and Jacques. Snowpiercer is a French graphic novel set kind of in the future, in the very near future. And what's happened is that in a failed government experiment to control the weather, the Earth has been sent into another ice age very rapidly and very quickly. At the time that this was happening, there was a train being engineered and built that had a motor that would run forever and wouldn't freeze. So what's left of civilization, what's left of human civilization, is now on this 100-some-odd car train that is circling the Earth over and over and over again. The stakes that are presented is that the train is slowing down. I believe this is in 3 volumes. I read the first volume, and a lot of the feedback that I was getting about this book was that people were pretty disappointed about it because it didn't match what they saw in the 2013 movie of Snowpiercer that was directed by Joon-ho Bong, and who did a beautiful, beautiful job of writing and directing this movie. What I learned is that the movie was based more on the second volume, and so I think when people were reading the first volume, they were a little bit disappointed because the first volume very much is sort of setting up the dynamics between the front of the train and the back of the train. But I'm excited to read the second volume and the third just to kind of see how it resolves. So that was my January wrap-up. I was pretty damn pleased with all the books that I read this month. But definitely let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books, if you love any of these books, if you hate any of these books, if you have good alternatives to any of these books, and also what are some standout books that you guys have read in the month of January. I would love to hear about them. So yeah, go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.